welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Rebecca. It's nice to meet ya. So it is officially April, which means it's time to go over our March reading wrap up. I think I read about 14 books in the month of March, and most of them were pretty good, so I say we had a decent month. I had a few that kind of flopped, but most of them I think I rated like 4 stars-ish, probably like an average. But let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. So the first book I read was The Love of My Afterlife by Christy Greenwood. And I really liked this book. It was super cute. It gave very much like 2000s rom-com vibes. I think all the characters in this were super cute. They had like super cute connections and they were all super weird, but I just loved the group of people that we got to follow in this book. So we have our female main character, and she's kind of a recluse. Like, she doesn't go out very much. She doesn't really do anything besides working her job and checking in on this neighbor that she has in her apartment building. So one day she comes home from work and she's just making her supper, and she makes herself a burger and she chokes to death on it. So she literally dies. She goes to this like afterlife waiting room, and she gets assigned this afterlife therapist who's like, yeah, you're dead, like this is it. And while she's there talking to this girl, this guy shows up who has also died, and she starts talking to them, and they have this like crazy connection. She's like, oh my gosh, I love this man, like who is he? But something ends up happening and he ends up getting sent back down to earth. So she goes to her afterlife therapist and she's like, hey, like that's the love of my life, I need you to send me back down so I can go find this man. And the afterlife therapist is a super big like romantic, so she's like, okay, I'll send you back down. You have a certain amount of time, and if you can go find him in this allotted amount of time, you can stay, but if you don't find him, you have to come back. And so we basically just follow our female main character while she goes on this adventure to try and find this man that she met for about 5 minutes. It was super sweet though. I loved all the characters, like I said. It was just a super cute little rom-com book. I think I rated it around 4 stars, but yeah, it was a good start to the month. The next book I read was City of Gods and Monsters by Kayla Edwards, and y'all, if you have not read this book, you need to stop this video, stop everything you're doing right now and go pick it up. It's that good. It's so good. It's about our main character, Lauren, and she's a human who lives in this world where there are a lot of like creatures, like there's vampires, wolves, witches, like anything you could think of really. And she's hanging out with her 2 friends who are not mortal, and they're out at a nightclub one night, and then when they're leaving, they're getting followed by this group of men, and they kidnap her friend. But whilst they're kidnapping her friend, you can tell that they were trying to kidnap Lauren and not the friend. So she's like, oh my gosh, what the hell is happening? Like, who are these people and why were they trying to kidnap me, and how the hell do I get my friend back? So a little time passes, she's going to work, and then she's getting followed by all these people still, and she's like, I have no idea what's happening. And she goes out to lunch on her work break, and she ends up getting cornered by these people, and she's down in this alley. And that's when our main character shows up, Darian Castle. Oh, I love that man. I love that man. And because he's basically a hunter, he gets hired to like go find people and bring them to people for money. So he comes and he sees her, there's like a huge bounty on her head, and he's like, okay, this is literally a human girl, like, so he kind of feels bad for her, and he's like, okay, like I'm gonna help protect you. So it kind of just goes on from there. They're like working together to try and figure things out. And there's like this huge group of characters again, like the Brown family in this, so good. And then I read the second book in this series called A City of Souls and Sinners. Now, I didn't like this one as much as I liked the first book, but I was also trying to get out of a reading slump, so I think that might have been a bit of the reason why. It just felt a little tiny bit draggy to me, but at the same time, I loved all the characters. I loved the world we're in, so I was like, okay, I don't really mind it. I think I rated it a 4 stars, which is the lowest out of the books in the series that are already out that I've read. And then the next book was City of Lies and Legends by Kayla Edwards, which is my favorite book in this series so far. Like, the first book was good, the second book was good, but this one was great. Like, I was obsessed with this book. Just like the way the plot was going in this one, like we started to get a lot more point of views from different characters, and it was like expanding the world and making everything everything seems so much cooler. So yeah, I can't really explain much about these two books because obviously they're part of a series and it would spoil everything going on in the series, but you're just gonna have to trust me and read it. It's so good. The next book I read was Reckless by Lauren Roberts, and I did not like it. I did not like it. This is the sequel to Powerless by Lauren Roberts, which is a part of her series, and this one just really fell flat for me. I don't know what it was. It just felt like anytime anything happened in the plot, it was repeated once or twice. I just felt like it was like repetitive and kind of like just not on par with Powerless, which was really upsetting because I really wanted to like this book. I love Lauren Roberts. I think she's so sweet, but I think I ended up rating this about a 2 stars. Obviously, again, I can't really explain what happens in the book because it is part of a series. However, it just, like, if you read Powerless and you loved it, I just don't think this stood up to that. The next book I read was A Touch of Golden Madness by Kayla DeVar. I actually really love this book way more than I thought I was going to. I had tried to start and read this book last year at some point, but I wasn't really in a fantasy mood when I started it, so I ended up like soft DNFing it. But I saw it being recommended in a vlog I was watching on YouTube, and I was like, this sounds really good. So I picked it up again, and the magic systems in this book are so cool. You have kinetic magic and you have elemental magic. So the kinetic magic obviously has to do with like electricity and types of things like that, and it's super cool. We're basically following our FMC, who is the daughter of the Kinetic King, and she gets sent out on a mission to kill the elemental prince named Griffin Silas. So her father sends her out on this mission. She fails. She ends up coming back and he's like super mad about it, but it's her birthday celebration that night, so he can't really do anything about it. But she ends up deciding to get a couple drinks with her friends and finds out that her father has poisoned one of the drinks that she had. So her friends manage to get her out and they find an antidote for her, and they're like, hey, like, you need to get out of this castle, like it is not safe for you here. She ends up managing to escape, and she ends up running in with the elemental prince, Griffin Silas, who, by the way, is so cute. I love that man. But she ends up running into him and they end up having to work together, so it kind of goes on from there. But honestly, yeah, I really like this book a lot more than I thought I was going to. I can't remember the exact rating I gave it. It'll be over here somewhere. But I really did enjoy that book. The next book I read was Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. One thing about me, I am a Hunger Games girly through and through. That series is like the first series I ever loved, like the first full series I ever read, and I was obsessed with every single character, every single book. So it was like super exciting to me to get to read a new Hunger Games in real time as an adult, and it to be about Haymitch of all people, who is my favorite character, not only in the Hunger Games, but he's one of my favorite book characters of all time. Obviously, going into this, I knew it was going to be like the most gut-wrenching thing I'd ever read, but it truly was like so hard to read. But it was also so beautiful, and there was so much lore drops and so much like connecting the dots to the rest of the books, which I really appreciated, and I love the way Suzanne Collins writes. So I was just fully obsessed with this book. I gave it 5 stars. I love it. The next book I read was The Embrace of Steel and Sorrow by Kayla DeVar, and this is the prequel series to the Touch of Golden Madness series. So the first book of the Touch of Golden Madness series is out, and the first book of the prequel trilogy is out. So you read A Touch of Golden Madness and then you read The Embrace of Steel and Sorrow. I didn't really like this one that much. I understand why it was necessary, and it did give a lot of insight into the book and like why things happened the way they did and why the characters are the way they are. But I just felt like I wish I had read it before I read A Touch of Golden Madness. I feel like I would have enjoyed it a lot more that way. However, it was nice to get like the backsight into these characters and figure out how everything ended up where it was when A Touch of Golden Madness started. The next book I read was Worthy of Fate by Anne Cottle. Now, I liked this book. I liked the premise of it, I liked the characters, and I liked the setting. However, I feel like the pacing of this book was really off from the rest of everything else. This is basically about a girl who is born with a mark, and the mark means you have to go into these like trials of sorts whenever they get called, which can be any time at all. So she ends up getting thrown into these trials. They're basically to see if a god finds you worthy, and the gods all have their own like little section in the land. So if the god deems you worthy, then you basically get to rule that land. And there's already rulers, of course, so if a god chooses someone they find worthy and they already have someone running it, they have to fight to see who wins. But she goes into these trials, she does them, and while she's there she finds her mate. But this stuff all happens so early on in the book that you can't really get to enjoy it. I feel like if this book had been split into two and they had really fleshed out the trials, they'd really fleshed out her meeting her mate, like all of those kinds of things, it would have been a lot more enjoyable for me. But other than that, I think it had a lot of potential. I did really enjoy everything else about it. The next book I read was Blood and Steel by Helen Schuster. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that last name, so I'm so sorry if I'm absolutely butchering it. But this book series is basically about a girl who lives in this like compound of sorts with a lot of like trainers, there's healers, all different types of things, and it has been completely outlawed for women to hold on to weapons, to fight, to do anything of that kind of thing because of a prophecy that started 20 years ago. Our female main character really wants to become one of these super hard to become guards. It's called a war sword, I believe, and she actually has a dagger on her that she found a couple years ago. It had fallen from one of these war swords and she picked it up. And when she tried to bring it back to him, he said, keep it. So she spends a lot of her free time like watching all the men training and like trying to train herself and all of these things. And then one day she gets caught by one of the war swords and he reports her to like the head of the compound. But a librarian who knows this girl sticks up for her and is like, hey, like if she's so talented, then why don't you let her go to the royals meeting and try to make a case for herself and see if she can try to become a warrior. So then she has to travel with the war sword who reported her to go to this royals meeting to try and become a warrior. But honestly, it was really good. It was just kind of one of those fantasy books you read and you're like, okay, yeah, like this is doing its job. Like I wasn't obsessed with the book, but I was reading it, I was having fun, I was like, this is doing its job. And I also read the second book in this series, which is called Vows and Ruin. Honestly, I kind of just felt the same way about it. It was just like a fun, silly time. Like I enjoyed reading it, I had fun reading it, but it wasn't like great, it wasn't amazing, but I still really had a good time reading it and it did what I needed it to do at the moment. Now, the last three books I read are all a part of a series and it's called Lady of Darkness by Melissa K. Rorick. And y'all, when I tell you this series, grab my and hold me into it. Like I was obsessed with this. I'm actually still reading it now. I'm on the fourth book, however it is April, so that doesn't count here. But the first three books of this series are so good. So obviously the first one is called Lady of Darkness. And basically it's about this girl named Scarlet and she's an assassin. She grew up in the Assassin's Guild with her two sisters who aren't really her sisters, but they're her sisters. And they're like super feared, super renowned all across the realm. Like everybody has heard of them, but nobody knows it's really them kind of thing. But anyways, the book starts off with her living with some royals in the town. She's no longer speaking to the assassin lord and she's not really in contact with either of the sisters she has. So she's living there and she ends up meeting the captain of the like high force that the king has, which is basically just like all of their best soldiers who are trained to like kill Fae, because they do not like Fae in the mortal realm. But this captain ends up coming over to the royal house where she lives and she discovers what he does and then she spars with him and she's like, hey, I want you to train me. I'm super rusty because I haven't done anything in a year, like, and you're really good. So they end up training together. Lots of secrets are discovered. There's so much mystery in this. It makes you want to keep reading to find out like what everything is. So that's basically what the first book is about. I loved Lady of Darkness, and the second book is called Lady of Shadows. Now, I didn't love this as much as I loved the first one or as much as I loved the third one. It was still really good. I just felt like the main character was trying too hard to be beloved. He just felt a little fan servicey in this book, which I didn't love. But if you push through some of that like cringy stuff that he said, it's so good. And then Lady of Ashes is the third book, which I also really enjoyed. I found it to be on par with or above the first book in the series. The plot in this one was so good. We started getting a lot more point of views from different characters, and the characters in this series are so amazing. There are so many different types of creatures in this series. There's vampires, there's shifters, there's fae, there's humans, there's royals and princes, and everything you could ever imagine is in this book, which also means there's so many different types of magic. There's so many like conflicts and friendships and relationships, and honestly it's just really beautiful. But yeah, so those were all of the books I read in March. I feel like we did really good, and I'm super excited to see what we read in April. But thank you guys so much for watching, and have a good day. Bye.